Okay, there we go. There we go. Good. Okay. Got my little windows set up. Alright, and there we go, and that's all good. And there we are. Seems to be working, which is always good. Hello from Edinburgh, Scotland. Hello from Germany. Hello from a dreary Pittsburgh. It's pretty dreary here right now. It's going to be kind of warm and humid, but it will be a little bit better over the course of the week, I believe. But yeah, for right now, it's kind of humid and gross outside. Good morning from Canton, Illinois, Sweden. It's going to be a hot one in Texas today. South Ontario, Netherlands, Mandalay, Washington, Southern Alberta, Hong Kong, Belgium, Manchester, Poland. I don't think I can pronounce the city that you're in Poland because it's got a lot of Z's in it. But still Poland, so that's pretty cool. Houston, France, Winneconne, Sharon, Massachusetts. One of my Deathwing Termies had a mishap with a rattle can Friday evening. Long story short, he's currently floating in a mason jar of LA's Totally Awesome. I have a model sitting in LA's Totally Awesome right now, actually. Hoping to scrub it off this afternoon. Norway, the French Alps, Slovakia, Greenland, Maine, Australia. Got a couple of Australias checking in. More Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania, Arkansas, Sweden, Scotland, Madison, Wisconsin, Italy, Idaho, Argentina, Melbourne, Brazil, Isle of Wight, Fort Myers, Huntington, West Virginia. Hello from hot Stockholm, Sweden. Delaware, Clearwater, Florida. Although I was in Madison virtually last night for FolksCon. Oh, I haven't heard of that one. Interesting. Morning from Omaha. Virginia, West Michigan, Redlands. Good evening from the Philippines. Uncle Adam painting up Bone Armor Eldar Guardians. Nice. Hello from a vat of acid in Chicago. Well, it's good to see that Moderator Matt has gotten out of the vat of acid. That's good to hear. Hey from hot Milwaukee. Yeah, it's going to be gross, like I said, kind of this whole area, but I think in the next couple of days after that, it'll be lovely again, or at least better. We've got England, we've got the land of Lincoln, we've got Alberta. Senor Skorpak and I send our greetings from Calgary. Nice. I think that, so if you've put like a little hat on him or maybe given him a guitar or something like that, that would be cool for Senor Skorpak. Or at least taught him to speak Spanish, I guess. Or maybe you're learning how to speak Spanish. I hadn't thought of that. Let's see here. Madison, Wisconsin. Good morning from Woodstock, Illinois. Using your new Necron paint scheme this morning, and it's turning out great. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, it's it's not a difficult technique, and one of the reasons that's one of the reasons why I did it, and not because I'm like, oh, if I'm going to teach something, I should definitely teach something easy. It's just because I like to use stuff that's easy. That's kind of the way it works when it comes to paints. So, but yeah, what did I do yesterday, hobby-wise? I worked on, well, I'll talk a little bit about it later, but one thing I also worked on was that Yeti that I've shown off on Twitch a couple of times. And, that was a relatively simple initial thing because I primed him white and then just slopped apothecary white all over him, and then went back and dry brushed to get the hairs back to white, but the spaces in between the hairs are then that kind of light gray that apothecary white does. And now I'm going through and doing, I've actually been going through and kind of highlighting individual hairs, some with a white, some with an ivory, to kind of give them a little bit of variation and stuff like that. So yeah. Morning from Cincinnati. Hey John, how you doing? Morning VJ Morph. Wet as the UK in Australia right now. Constant rain. I'm not a big fan of rain. Let's see here. Hello from Raleigh. Just finished a family trail bike ride. Now to get to listen on the drive home. Nice. Trying to finally finish Dark Empyrean, so Indomitus will stop staring at me from the corner. See, at least you're trying to do them in order, which I think is a good idea. That makes a lot of sense. Any plan to broadcast this show on Twitch as well? No, because you're not supposed to, or something. Like if I try to get partner, then on Twitch, then you're not supposed to multi-stream. Like if you decide you don't want partner, then you can. It's fine. But currently, yeah. Plus, I don't even know. I don't know the first thing about how I would do that, and then I would have to try to keep track of 2 different chats at the same time, and I'm bad at keeping track of one, if you've noticed. There are ducks swimming in my driveway. That's, cute, I guess, but maybe problematic. Finishing up my Indomitus Scarab Swarms, listening to the Rain and Adam. Oh, well, that's probably not so bad. Got 30 more Necron warriors assembled. Big question is, do I remove all the mold lines or just the most obvious ones? I'm a big fan of getting rid of mold lines. That does slow me down in some situations, but I didn't find that I had a ton of mold lines with the warriors that I built, but there were some. Not a ton, but some. Unless you're building the old ones and not the ones from the new Indomitus box. I may have missed that. The old ones had lots of mold lines, that's true. Good morning, fam. Lurking at work. Have to do yard work later in this heat. Yuck. Blech. That sounds like no good, Emily. I would say no. Hello from Canton, Ohio. Just finished my first Kill Team minis yesterday. Some Thousand Sun rubrics. Nice. I would like to paint those eventually. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Good morning from Apopka. I may have pronounced that improperly. Florida. I finally decided to conquer my fears and started working on my Thousand Suns starter box. See, there you go. Zangors will do triple duty in 40k, Warcry, and Kill Team. They're one of those units that you can do that with, and it's kind of cool. So yeah, definitely. Let's see. Today I'm using base expanders on just shy of 300 Orc Boys to upgrade them to 32mm bases. That sounds like a big project. Wow. But yeah, that's pretty cool, though. I'm glad that people have come up with that system where you can, these base expanders, last that I saw at least, are usually kind of like, because the bases are, on the edge are like this. So you either have to get something that would be able to go over the model, and a lot of times they've got guns and swords and crap sticking out, so you can't do that. Or they generally make them so they're 2-piece, so you put the model down and then you just kind of take these things and then it makes the base bigger. So it's like that. Started the hobby in March during the beginning of COVID. Have almost 5,000 in points of Necrons fully assembled. About to paint them all at once in sub-assemblies with my new airbrush. Any tips? Well, I personally would take them in kind of smaller pieces. Don't try to do 300 of them at once or whatever. I would start out by doing them in 5s or maybe 10s, and see what you think. But yeah, good luck with that. And Airbrush is that will help speed things along, definitely, especially with Necrons. Strictly speaking of painting, do you prefer plastic resin or metal minis? Generally plastic, which is part of, again, today's kind of topic, is that another thing that I was doing yesterday as well, besides working on that Yeti, is I also was building some metal miniatures, which I haven't done in a long time, frankly. So yeah, it's interesting. They're a little harder to work with, frankly. But yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Just got a bunch of Hot Wheels yesterday. Excuse me. For Gaslands, we'll be modifying them today. Nice. Let's see here. Morning from Uperland. Matthew Sears says that Uperland can't be a place. Oh, it's a place, my friend. It's the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, but Uperland is also, that's the other name for it. Good morning. Have you ever thought of doing a tutorial in magnetizing? I've been asked before. I'm not particularly good at it. I've done it a little bit, but not for years. I did it a bit with back in when I was playing more 40K, and you're like, well, I got this sergeant, and sometimes I want him to have a plasma pistol, and sometimes I want him to have, I don't know, a banana or something else in his hand. And rather than building two sergeants with two different loadouts, you could magnetize. But I was frequently bad at it. I want to say the last time that I magnetized anything was, what's that Primaris dreadnought, the big one? I can't think of his name. It's not a repulsor, that's the tank. It's a something, some sort of name. Anyway, I tried to magnetize because he can have like a big, huge machine gun, excuse me, or he can have a big plasma cannon, and I magnetized those tenuously at best. It's one of those situations where, like, if you pick up the model and move it a little too briskly, then the weapon will fall off. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, I'm not great at it, frankly. Hey, I used your way to paint my Necrons, and I love how they look. Well, good. I'm glad to hear it. Painting through my backlog, got 286 models to paint, but only like painting anyways, and 160 of them are Space Marines, and another 72 are Eldar, so mostly one color for them. Chaos is half done. Well, that's pretty good. Hello from Germany. I try to survive the sun and start some bloodletters and please the blood god. Nice. Good morning, Uncle Adam. Working to finish painting my warbands and expand the terrain for my upcoming second edition of Frostgrave. Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. Saw the video on terrain. Do you have a suggestion of other models or brands for big scenario pieces that are multi-purpose? Big scenario. I mean, Gale Force 9 makes a lot of stuff. They call it Battlefield in a Box, and that has a lot of things that you can use. I own a bunch of that because it's good multi-purpose stuff. The folks, like I said, at Monster Fight Club are also doing a lot of multi-purpose stuff. So yeah, I would take a look at some of those. I have some old Necrons I got in a lot of other figures, stripping to repaint, but trying to decide how I want to proceed with fixing plastic inserts on the barrels. Yeah, that's a tough one, especially if you're stripping the warriors. Yeah. Redemptor, that's the name of that thing. Yeah, my Redemptor is magnetized. It's the last thing I magnetized, and it was probably a year and a half ago. I have some old Necrons. I just mentioned that one. I've been working on your baking soda and super glue sand bases with some kitty litter mixed in. I want to expand other materials in the basing too. Any recommendations for adding extra bits? From some companies, you can buy real small little fragments of like slate, and those can work really well. Evidently, at pet stores, you can buy bags of crushed walnut shells or something like that, and it's used for some sort. I don't know. It's like used for like bedding for lizards or something like that, or you put it in the bottom of your lizard cage, or I don't know. And that's a bigger kind of chunkiness. But if you got a friend who's got a lizard and it's got some of that stuff, you could get a little bit of it, and then you could always have slightly larger rocks that you could put on your bases and stuff. But then also cork is also nice too. I just don't like to use it real flat though. I like to make it look more like a rock. Never assembled easy-to-build models before. Do you still use blue/liquid green stuff in your push-to-fit assemblies, or does everything stay tightly together, held over time? I still put a little tiny touch of glue in there, but otherwise they stay together pretty well. Afternoon here, working on some Flames of War Hummels and Hornices. Hornici? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I spent a very rainy weekend in Australia painting a Primaris captain in a superhero, in a super retro second edition color scheme. Just for the sake of it, super enjoyable. Nice. There you go. I find the magnetizing is model specific. Space Marine techniques don't work well on Tyranid warriors, etc. That's also very true. Like the arms, where the arm attaches to the shoulder on a normal Space Marine, is easier to magnetize than, let's say, when you have a Tyranid and maybe one of their scything claws or whatever, scything talons, whatever they're called, it goes like kind of almost like a little bit of a ball and socket sort of a situation. The ball and socket thing's really hard to magnetize, or at least pretty difficult to magnetize. Should I mask off the wings of my hive turret so I can paint the finger-like spines? Generally, what I do is, I would probably, personally, what I would do is I would airbrush the wings and get those where I like, and then go back and brush paint the spines afterwards, because then any overspray from the panels, the membranes between the spines on the wings, those would you'd cover that up by painting over it with the brush. If you do the skinny bits first and then try to do the wide bits, you might have a harder time with it. So there's that. Yeah, it's a lot about just trying to figure out, well, if I'm going to do this, what's that going to affect, and is that okay? And if I just decide to paint that part that's going to get affected, if I paint that later, then it'll be fine. So, yeah, it's kind of like the Necrons that I did. I did that big silver dry brush on everything with the big makeup brush to get everything, silver the way I wanted it, and it got onto the blades, which is not where I wanted it to get. But, I could have masked them off, but what I did is I just waited until everything was dry, and then I just went back with a brush and I painted the blades black again. So then I could then do the next steps that I wanted to do. Because I'd started with black, it worked out just fine. I'm going to paint some Imperial Guard today. I'm trying to start an army. Any tips? Start with troops. Definitely start with troops. If you're going to start an army, start with troops because A, you're always going to need troops. No matter what they do to a codex, they probably are not going to make it so that troops are not useful. And B, it also gets your painting muscle stretched a little bit and gets you a little bit more used to painting that army when you start with the troops. If you start off by painting an HQ unit, then later on, after you've painted a bunch of other things, you might go back and look at that HQ unit and go, well, I don't like the look of it now. And so if you just kind of get all that stuff out of the way with your troops a little bit, then you'll be happier with your final, or your big HQ or elites or anything along those lines. Did you paint those Crisis Protocol minis yet? I'm almost done with the entire catalog, waiting on the new releases they announced at Gen Con Online. I haven't yet, no. I've been working on other stuff, but that was the plan. Magnetizing is easy if you can remember how to calculate flux from your physics degree. Sure, yeah, I can definitely understand that. The Indominus box is a pleasure to assemble. Do you think easy fit models become a mainstay for GW? I think on a lot of models, I mean, they're doing that as it is, like with HQ units, like the ones I can think of off the top of my head, like the Primaris HQ units, like your apothecary and your chaplain and like your, all that stuff, and pretty much all of the lieutenants, they all have a monopose like thing. But the benefit to that is that there's only one of them generally in your army, so it's not like you've got a line of apothecaries who are all posed exactly the same. That would be weird. I think with the more troop-oriented models, they're always going to release some push-fit style monopose models, inexpensive ones and things like that, kind of like they did with the Primaris, the Reavers, the Death Guard, the Poxwalkers, that kind of stuff. They won't do it for every army, obviously, but they'll do it for a bunch. But you could also get both Reavers and Death Guard. Well, I say both, actually more than two. You could get the Reavers, the Death Guard, and the Primaris in non-monopose too. So troops, I think you will see for a good long time being generally still available and posable, sort of. I mean, it's like you can basically pose them and then, you want their gun to be like this or like that? You want their torso to be like this or like that? I mean, it's not like you can... It's not like this guy, right? Like this guy's posable, right? So he can do all kinds of stuff. Like he's got knees and all. Even his feet are posable. I can just bend just this foot, But that's not going to work for when they talk about posable models. It just basically means you can kind of move them a little bit, change their head position, stuff like that. Which honestly, with a push fit model, you can do that too if you have enough imagine and believe in yourself. So there's that. Working on my assault intercessors base coated with a spray can, and it spat a little blob on one or two flat bits, thinking of turning those bits into battle damage. That's the way to go. Life gives you lemons, etc. So yeah. Afternoon from sunny England. Great content as always. Any tips for Zenithal undercoat without an airbrush? If you're going to try to do the Zenithal, one option is to try to use a big honkin' makeup brush. I've talked about it quite a bit, especially on Twitch. I've been using them a lot on Twitch. Not this weekend, but last weekend and the weekend before. Last weekend I was painting, actually the model that's from this cover card here, this model and his 5 friends. and they're from a board game called The Unquiet Dead, or it's Wildlands. It's an expansion called The Unquiet Dead, and I was painting for Gen Con Online, working with the folks from Board Game Geek. So I was painting. Basically, the idea of those streams was to teach people who are board gamers, this is how you can very easily paint your board game models. So in that situation, I primed those models black, and then I used white with a big makeup brush, one of those big, huge makeup brushes, which I did a video about makeup brushes last year. So check that one out. But using that can make, it's not going to be as nice as a spray Zenithal. Like if you're not using a rattle can or an airbrush, it's not going to be quite as nice. But it will give you definitely a very interesting, like, if you look at basically what I did is I painted this, or I used the dry brush, not the dry brush that's in this picture, but I used the big fat makeup brush on this. And then the rest of the colors are basically all contrast colors because they're transparent. So that's the whole point. But yeah, you can do it. It just is not going to be as smooth. The transitions won't maybe be as nice. But especially on a textured or more a model like that, it will work out actually pretty well. So. Anybody else into painting miniatures with just cyan, magenta, yellow, black, and white? Trying to teach myself color theory. Wow, that is color theory, all right. I'd actually like a whole squad of Necrons, all eerily identical in the exact same pose. Now, that'd be kind of cool too. Nowadays you'd be harder to do it because in the Indominus box, I think they're 10 separate poses. So you'd have to buy a lot of Indominus boxes, or make each squad you could make the pose number 4 and just make an entire squad of pose number 4, and then an entire squad worth of pose number 7 or whatever, that kind of thing. I'm actually curious if the two-handed intercessor bolt rifles will fit on the running assault intercessor bodies. I don't know if they would or not. Maybe. That's a good question. Once they come out with the regular ones, with some cutting, I'm sure you could. I'm thinking of using a wash and trying to paint it into the curves of the muscles in the body and not a full wash all over. There's something to try for wash. Is this something to try, or wash the whole thing and then rebase coat flat spots? That was hard to say. Definitely some people will, if they've got a steady enough hand and a small enough brush, will just basically try to put wash just in the places that they want it, like just in the crevices or just in the folds of, or the creases between, or whatever, the spots between muscles, let's say that. So you could do that. That's something to take a look at. I would definitely give it a try and see what you think. But I have seen also other people put it on a little bit more liberally and then go back and then, with a layer paint, kind of clean up the flatter areas or whatever. The parts that are not, the rounded, or the parts that are not the crevices. Crevices sounds so weird. Speaking of rattle cans, any recommendations for a red rattle can that matches any of the GW reds? Well, I don't know if the red rattle cans from Army Painter match the GW colors. I know they match their own colors, but I don't know if they match the GW colors. But those are the only other red cans I can think of. Hey, Adam, have you tried writing your own game rules? I'm not particularly good at it, I don't think. I did used to have a very small little game company with a friend of mine, a little hobby press, as it was known. We both had day jobs and stuff like that, but we were doing this on the side. We made I don't want to say we made board games. We didn't make miniatures games. But yeah, we did publish technically 3 games, but 2 of them were the same because we republished one under a different name because of legal reasons. We didn't do anything wrong. We came up with the idea first, and then that BattleBots TV show came along, and that was the name of our first game. And then they were like, hey, you're using our name. And we're like, actually, no, you're using our name, and here's the proof that we started this in 1993 or whatever. And they were like, oh. And so then they bought the rest of our stock, which we didn't have much left, to be frank. But they bought the rest of our stock, and then we just got to republish the game under a different name that no one else has used since, which is good. So yeah. Oh man, I love that skeleton. Can you post a link? Just do a Google search for Wildlands, The Unquiet Dead. There's actually a whole bunch of cool looking models in that set. There's 6 models in that box, and it's very cool. So yeah, it reminds me, honestly, the sculptor who did that set, The Unquiet Dead, reminds me. The sculptor reminds me of. It looks like a Hellboy comic book, like that artwork kind of. So, big honkin' makeup brush for life. Who needs Duncan's tutorials anymore? That's very very good point. I think that big honkin' makeup brush is greater than all of Duncan's tutorials. That's probably not true, but definitely you should look. You should look into it because they are awesome. Will you be using the Space Marines in Indominus to bulk out your Black Templar, Adam? They are very Black Templar looking. I mean, they are definitely like, they should be because they're actually assault. My current Black Templar kill team is more shooty, although they do have some Reavers in it. I don't know. I kind of want to make another Primaris kill team and use those guys, but I'm almost thinking about not doing Black Templar just because I'd like to try a different paint scheme. But I haven't decided yet. Once I see the rules, the actual kill team rules for the Primaris, then I'll know what I want to do. Well, I'll have a better idea at least. I tried contrast over Zenithal and felt contrast paint to be too flowy, and it left some surfaces so marbly and not smooth where my watered down acrylics go on nice and thin. Thoughts? I mean, in big flat areas, they don't work as well, contrast. You need more texture. Or you need to be much more careful with them, but they are a little hard to use in big flat areas. Like, I would never probably use contrasts on a Space Marine unless I was going to airbrush it over a Zenithal. So if I did a black and white Zenithal on a Space Marine and then I airbrush contrast paint through, it goes on super flat and super smooth, and it's transparent, so the black and white still comes through, but it doesn't do the contrast thing where it gets down in the crevices and all that kind of junk. But it becomes a very nice, just smooth color that goes over a black and white fade like that. But yeah, contrast paints, you can't just let them sit there. You kind of have to be careful with them a little bit, or be working on a model that's got a lot of texture on it, because then it just doesn't matter. But in flat areas, it's not great. So yeah, if you are making basically glazes with your acrylic paints, then that's, I think, another great way to go. I was doing some of that also with some of the models that I was working on recently. And I've been doing some glazing a little bit here and there with the Skaven that I've been doing recently on Twitch. If you're interested and you'd like to watch me on Twitch, you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/tabletopminions. I am currently streaming Monday nights at 7 p.m. Central and Friday mornings at 10 a.m. Central. I usually go for about 3 hours, and I am getting close to finished with my Skaven warband. They're plague monks for Warcry. I refer to them as the 13 because there are 13 of them, strangely. And so, yeah, they're getting close to being done. But yeah, I'll be painting them again tomorrow night, and so I'm looking forward to getting them done. I almost kicked around the idea of actually doing just a surprise stream yesterday because I kind of wanted to work on them, but I worked on other stuff instead, so. All right, so have you tried the new trend of painting with oils yet? The experts make it look easy, but it would be nice to see an everyman show us how it works in our typical skill set. I don't know that I personally believe that the oils are designed for the everyman, if that's where you want to go with that. They are definitely, the reason you use oils, for those of you that don't know, the reason that you might use oils in miniature painting is because you want to be able to do a lot of blending. Oil paints take a long time to dry, which is a bummer if you're waiting for your model to dry so you can start playing with it or whatever, but it's cool when you want to blend two colors together. And by a long time to dry, I don't mean like a couple hours, I mean a couple of days, sometimes longer. Now there are water-based oils, which must be new and seem to break science in my mind, because there's the whole oil and water don't mix thing, but whatever. What hath man wrought? Anyway, so there's like I said, there's water-based acrylic or oils now. But a lot of the folks on the really good painters on Twitch have been moving into oils. I mean, people like James Wapple, our own friend Eni Minis, she's been doing some oils as well, and it's very cool. But I don't know that it's not. I don't think it's for me, number one, and I don't know that it's for people who are just trying to get stuff painted and put on the table. Like if you're looking for gaming pieces, I think the oils, because you can't, like I said, unless you're using the water-based ones, you can't like thin them with water. You have to thin them with like mineral spirits or turpentine or something. I painted with oils a little bit in college, like on canvas. And then I moved to acrylics, and I kind of prefer it. But, yeah. Like, if you really want to make it so that it's easier to blend and you want to slow down your drying time, there are acrylic drying retarders that you can use that will make it so your acrylics won't dry as quickly, and then you can blend a little bit better. I know that Sam uses, like, drying retardant a little bit here and there, just so that he can do wet blending a little bit easier in certain situations. So, take a look at that potentially. Ryan says, just let me say, if it's been a while since you painted, don't start back up with 3 HQs, do some troops instead. Painting 3 exalted sorcerers and then feeling the pain. Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely bang those troops out, and then you can start moving into some of your HQs and things like that. I'm just sitting here trying to finish all my projects before my first child comes to this earth. Well, good luck with that. I'm actually painting my Space Marines by airbrushing a contrast paint, Flesh Tearers Red, over a Zenithal coat. It does indeed work pretty well. Yeah, airbrushing contrast works really, really well. It just doesn't do anything like contrast. But it's a really good, like a transparent color that you can put over something else, and it does a really good job that way. And it can be very smooth. I must have gotten the wrong makeup brush because the one I got works worse than my army painter one that I have. It's like the bristles are too close together. Like the ones that I generally like to use are like real big fat soft heads, and they're generally like blending brushes for like your like up here part of your face kind of, I guess. But yeah, they do work really well that way. I know you've painted Black Templars, so you have done the black armor thing before. I'm still trying to decide how to paint my Raven Guard troops. Any tips or ideas there? Possible quick paint? The way that I did mine is I primed them black, and then I took a very dark gray, or a maybe even medium dark gray. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. If you have an airbrush, you could take like a medium gray and then basically do a zenithal where you're spraying from above through your airbrush. So you've got this black model, completely primed black, and now you're shooting gray down onto it. And now it doesn't look black anymore because it's got this gray, but it looks black in the shadows and the under, armpits and all that kind of stuff. Then I would throw Nuln oil on it, and then that would help to darken it back down again, but then you're still going to have the variation. The other thing you can do, which I think I did on my Death Watch, is you can just paint them black and then use a real dark gray and use the makeup brush, the big fat honking makeup brush, and just do that, and it kind of edge highlights everything and also catches some of the flat areas even and sort of lightens them up a little bit. The softer the brush, the better the effect. And the kind of slower you go with it, not back and forth slower, but like don't put on too much paint all at once and try to get it done in one coat. You might have to take a couple of coats and sort of build it up. Works real well. Like I just don't, I'm not good at edge highlighting in most situations, so I try to find ways to get around it, and that worked out well. VJ Morph says that Eni just jumped on Twitch actually, and she's working on oils for the show. Yeah, she's been working on oils a lot lately. Switching to oils for your miniature painting is definitely a risk. I wouldn't consider it outside of a competition piece. I mean, well, or a display piece. Like I said, I don't know that I would use it too much on normal miniatures that I plan on gaming with. But for other kind of stuff, yeah, definitely. I used oils on my board game monsters from Descent. Pretty fun to practice, and I never got to play that, so plenty of time to dry. Well, that's helpful. It makes sense. Knocked out the Indominus Necrons in 4 days in a desert theme. Makeup brush was very useful. Yeah, I liked. I really, it worked really well on them. I was thinking about Grey Knights just recently, and I was wondering if I wanted to try to do not the exact same technique, but if I wanted to do prime them black and then makeup brush the silver onto them, or if I wanted to airbrush the silver onto them, and I'm not sure yet. So, Uncle Adam, Uncle Adam, you have to use white spirits when thinning cleaning up oils. Yeah, I couldn't remember if it was mineral spirits or white spirits or whatever. I know that there was turpentine at some point, and linseed oil when I was painting on canvases in college. Picked up some mixing balls for my contrast paints and the dropper bottles. Realized I still had some original Citadel snakebite leather in a hexagonal pot. A bit of a flow improver, and it works a treat. Nice. I got to tell you, the new. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and I think that the new contrast snakebite leather is possibly one of my favorite. It's possibly my favorite paint in the world. It is just, I don't know, man. It's just like, not yesterday. Friday morning, when I was streaming on Twitch, so a lot of these Skaven plague monks, not all of them, but a lot of them have like this kind of like leather, like, it's not a hat. It's just like they found a piece of leather and they poked some eye holes in it and then wrapped it around their heads because they're rats. They're not super into, fashion. So, but they have these kind of like head wraps, sort of, and then their noses are poking out the front, and even made little holes for their ears, but and they can see, and that's great. But they're just like a weird thing. And so I wanted to make them kind of a brown color. And so I started one, I painted mahogany, and I'm like, that's fine, and a little bit of this. And then on a couple of them, I'm like, because they're primed green. Like, I primed these models green, so I was not putting any undercoating on there, which is why I was using predominantly more opaque colors, because I'm like, I can just throw an opaque color over it and I don't have to worry. So I'm like, well, I'll throw snakebite leather contrast on top of this, leather head wrap. Even though it's already green, we'll see what it looks like. Looked phenomenal. Went into all the little crevices, did all the stuff, looked great, spectacular. Covered the green well enough that you kind of didn't tell. It looked great. And then I wish that I had done all of them that way. I was trying to break them up so that some of them have different colored. Like, I didn't want them all to find the exact same fabric to make their head wraps out of. I wanted them to be kind of different. Even though their robes are all basically the same color, I want their head wraps to be different. But now I wish I had done them all with the snakebite leather. It's just one of my favorites. My risk is painting the new Necrons in a vaporwave color scheme. Well, that's kind of cool. I saw Dana Howell on YouTube, and she was painting, I want to say, Night Haunts in a vaporwave kind of look. They were cool. Roughly how many uses do you get out of your makeup brushes? I mean, they can go a pretty long time, honestly. I've had a lot of people asking me recently, how do you clean the makeup brushes? Which I needed, I guess, to make a video about, because I've been asked that many times. Honestly, the way you clean the makeup brushes is once you get done doing the dry brushing, you just dip it in water, but don't, like, let's say the bristles are, let's say, this long, okay, just as an example. You would not dip all the way to the metal. You would dip literally like, I don't know, a quarter or a fifth of the, just kind of gently dip it into the water, maybe wiggle it a little bit, whatever, let it sit there for a second, pull it out, and then just get yourself a bunch of paper towel and then just start going back and forth on it to try to get the color to come off. And then that works. And then you're going to have to set it aside to dry. You're not going to be able to use it for probably a good half an hour because it takes time to dry. So either have multiple big honking makeup brushes, which is what I've got now. I've ordered a couple. I found a couple on Amazon, I think. But otherwise, I just didn't want to go out locally to a store to do it for, Anyway, so you could do that, but that's, you don't have to use anything fancy. And like I said, my initial one that I first started using, I'm still using. It's currently dyed a bit green, but, I mean, it still works fine. So, but one thing I've noticed, especially if you use it for dry brushing, which is obviously what you would use it for, when you're about to start dry brushing something else not for the first time, but let's say you haven't used it in a week or even a couple of days, if it's dried out, definitely take it and like just kind of go back and forth and just rub it on your fingers or do something, because there will be almost like paint dust in there that you want to get out. And I've been finding if I don't do that first, then as soon as I start dry brushing on my model, even if you, again, on Twitch, if you watch me do it, you all of a sudden see like this cloud of dust that sort of comes up and whatever. So make sure you try to get that off first. I don't think it hurts anything specifically. It just then covers your model in dust that you have to try to blow off or brush off later. So there's that. Pretty stoked with the success I'm having with my 3D printer. I've moved from out of the box to customized sculpts and self-support in just over 6 weeks. Well, that sounds pretty cool, VJ. Any advice on stripping old testers enamels off of D&D models painted in the mid-'80s? Well, if they're metal models, then you could, I don't know if isopropyl alcohol would be something that would get that off. Otherwise, you'd have to probably use something like maybe acetone, which you need to be very careful with because it's poisonous and super flammable. But if they're metal models, acetone will not hurt them. Acetone will melt plastic and resin in most situations, so watch out for that. Like, I mean, you could give LA's Totally Awesome a try. I've never used it on enamels, so I don't know. Have you tried the new Rune Lord brass with Canopec Armor Shade? Nope. I don't even know if my shop, because that's the can, right? Or is that the brush on stuff? The four new colors that they came out with, I know my shop has, but I don't think they have the big spray can of the Rune Lord brass, if that's what I'm thinking of. They do have some of that new, like Necron, excuse me, Necron glow, which I didn't buy. I looked at it and I was like, and I've watched a video I think or two, and I was like, yeah, I can't personally currently think of a great way to use it, so. Having some allergies this morning, I apologize. Hi from Romania. I'm painting the Indominus Necron Warriors with your method, only with yellow instead of the glowy green stuff. Nice, nice. I wash my makeup brushes that I use for actual makeup with shampoo. I haven't tried that. Uncle Adam, what's your opinion on branded brush cleaners? I don't know what that means. Branded brush cleaners. Like brush cleaners by a company that has a brand, or I don't think I'm following. Sorry. I have, let's see, what do I have for brush cleaner? There's the old standby stuff that comes in the round kind of hockey puck. I can't think of the name of it. It's not, is it Masterson's? I don't know. It's somebody. I have some of that, and I also have Games and Gears makes a square painting or soap. I keep meaning to get from Monument Hobbies. I want to get some of their brush cleaner stuff. Jen's, I can't think of what it's called, but it's Jen's something or other brush cleaner. And I want to get some of that to try on some older brushes to see how it would work out. But yeah. I've also started to look into doing industrial bases rather than just flock. There are some really cool really cool ideas that use bits from around the house. Yeah, I could see that too, definitely. I like. I'm starting to kind of get into Necromunda a little bit too, because I got a friend who wants to get into it. So I already had the models because I was using them for like kit bashing and stuff like that, so it was not too big of a deal. But when you buy Necromunda kits, they come with bases, like pretty much everything from Games Workshop does, but their bases are not like the normal black bases. They are kind of like a gray plastic, and they look like industrial stuff. I don't know what you would call it, but yeah, that's the difference. And so if you're interested in looking at that kind of thing, you can also buy those bases separately, I believe. So they're kind of cool. People are saying that brake fluid could also get that stuff off your metal models potentially. I've never tried that stuff. I just used LA's Totally Awesome to strip 62 guardsmen. Worked great and also didn't damage a resin mini. Nice. Yeah, I've never had a damaged resin either. I used Canoptic Gloss over the Rust-Oleum stainless steel color. Worked great. That's the thing, is that I like the concept of that color, but it's a gloss color, and I'm kind of like, I mean, I guess, but I don't know. I just don't like gloss generally. Bought an ultrasonic cleaner last week. Stripped some old 4th Ed, 5th Ed Eldar Guardsmen. Or Guardians, not Guardsmen. Sorry. And I swear the thing is witchcraft. Paint sloughed off like gristle on a turkey. That's an interesting analogy. But yes, yeah. No, I love my ultrasonic cleaners. I have two. I have one that's just for my airbrushes, and another one that I use sometimes for stripping. Right now, this model that I'm stripping is just like in a plastic tub that I think Potato Salad came in. Because what I'm stripping is that I sprayed old primer on it. I thought the can was not as old as it was, but it was. And so it's real powdery. So you can almost brush a lot of it off, but you can't brush all of it off. So I didn't think I needed to go ultrasonic with it. Plus it's plastic, so I just didn't think it mattered. Currently painting an Underworld's band with just GW basic paint set. We own too many paints and do not know enough about color theory. Well, that's kind of cool, yeah. Any tips for painting pale flesh? Struggling with a Norse Blood Bowl team, looking too dark for Vikings with Bugman's Cadium Kislev and Reichland Flesh Shade. Generally what I do is I try to find a real light colored flesh color as a base, and then I will frequently throw a wash over it, like a sepia wash, but I'll water it down. So you start off with a relatively pale kind of, like, you know, whatever your favorite pale kind of complexion is. You know, something that's a Caucasian kind of peachy, but as pale as possible. Or you take the color that's not quite enough and you add some ivory to it, mix that up, boom, do the face. And again, this is like super fast. I'm not a face expert, but I would do that. Then I would throw a watered down sepia wash, and then I would go back and highlight up again a little bit with that same first color you mixed. So it's best to try to do that on a wet palette so it stays wet. And then I would catch up like the forehead, maybe like the tops of the cheeks and the top of the nose. Depending on the sculpt, sometimes you can catch the top of the lip if you want to. And then if you really need an extreme highlight, like specifically the bridge of the nose or the tip of the nose or something like that, then you would go back in with ivory. That's what I would do. Because you might go, well, but ivory's not a skin color. You're like, yeah, but when it's a highlight, you don't notice it. If you did the entire thing in ivory, then you'd be like, well, that's kind of weird looking. But, you know. Now that I'm thinking of LA is totally awesome, I have minis sitting in it that I should check on them. Eventually, probably, yeah. Over-the-counter nail polish remover is diluted acetone I've used to strip plastic of enamel just fine. Really? Strip plastic? I would think it would make it a little bendy, but I suppose if it's diluted, maybe not. Sam says, just got a Badger 105 and an airbrush compressor. Life-changing. Yeah, I mean, airbrush is really, really nice. It really can help speed things up. Depending on where you live, there are lots of times, and I've talked about this before, where you just can't, it's really hard to prime. It's either too humid or too cold or whatever. So being able to just sit there at the airbrush and do your priming and then start doing Zenithal priming and then maybe start doing some base colors and maybe start even doing a little bit of highlighting. Don't worry about like, oh, I got to paint the entire model in Airbrush. Like when you see people online who are good airbrushers, people I can think off the top of my head on Twitch right now, Kenny Boucher from Next Level Painting, Mohawk Miniatures. I've at least seen both of them do some pretty fancy airbrush stuff recently, but you don't need to start there. I mean, honestly, just priming alone is great, and then if you move to maybe priming and base coating or priming and Zenithal, it will speed things up for you quite well. So I tried a new technique today, base coated my minis in white/off-white, applied a dark tone wash over it, and then used a watered down paint. I got a really cool accidental camo effect that way. Interesting, nice. Genuine Vision, hey, how you doing, Jane? Afternoon from Ireland. Huge chance, and one that involves money as well, or the lack of it. Say I want to play war games, and the way into it, till money is no problem, is printing the models in 2D. How can I explain that? I don't even know. I'm not sure. That's a good question. Printing the models in 2D. I mean, I guess if you're just going to use like tokens, you could do that, and then just to learn the rules and stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I mean, that's a thing you could do. It's going to be kind of difficult to some degree because you are generally concerned about like line of sight and how high something is, but you could, there's ways around that probably too. You should learn to make your own potato salad, but then you wouldn't have those beautiful containers. Number one, true, I wouldn't have those beautiful containers, but B, I would rather just eat I like this potato salad quite a bit from the local grocery store. It's become my favorite, which probably makes my mom unhappy because my dad's potato salad used to be my favorite, but this stuff is really, really good. So, and it's been on sale pretty much all summer, which is nice too. I think we have a container in the fridge right now, as a matter of fact. My wife's not paying attention. That's okay. Let's see here. For light flesh, I used Rakarth Flesh plus Reikland Flesh Shade. That worked really good for me. And then Rakarth Flesh mixed with Kislev for highlights. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I don't go crazy with faces. I know there's a lot of people who, if you're like a really good painter, you spend a ton of time on the face and the head and all that kind of stuff. I'm very frequently just like, throw a color over it, throw a wash over it, maybe throw some more wash in the eye sockets to kind of darken it up even a little bit more, and then do some highlights, top of the nose, forehead a little bit, tops of the cheeks. Because again, I'm just painting troops quickly for tabletop. I've also used nail polish remover. It did melt plastic a bit, but found it really good for metals. Yeah, I would not use it probably for resin or plastic, but for metals, it would probably work. If you can't find acetone, nail polish remover might do the job. I know that years ago I watched a video that Les Bursley did on YouTube, and he's also like a super pro airbrusher. And he goes through every couple of months and cleans all of his airbrushes, and he has a lot of them. And he cleans them all with, I can't remember if he uses acetone or if he just uses straight up nail polish remover. I forget what he said in the video, but yeah. Where are we at here? People get hung up on the airbrush price, but you can throw a lot more paint and the time saving. Yeah, no, honestly, I'm amazed at how little paint I sometimes use. Like, I know when I go outside to paint a bunch of models, like, or to prime a bunch of models, and I'm going to use a rattle can, I feel like I'm wasting so much paint because I'm spraying this rattle can and it's just going all over the place, you know. But when I'm priming models with my airbrush, I'm using literally like, let's say I got 6 models to do. All right, 8 drops of primer into the cup, and then I generally rarely ever have to actually add more in. So yeah. Just got into the hobby, really scared of painting sometimes. Just always scared to ruin the minis and not have them look great, albeit I enjoyed a lot. Well, number one, you can't ever ruin a mini. We've just been talking about stripping paint off the models. If you paint it and you're like, I hate this, it's terrible, just strip the model. It'll come apart. Like if it's generally when you strip a model, if you're using super glue to glue the parts together, very frequently those parts will come apart again. You just have to maybe sand them a little bit, glue them back together. So it's a little bit extra time, certainly, but that's practice. Like that's what you have to do. If you want to become a pianist, you have to practice. If you want to get really good at, I don't know, ultimate frisbee, you have to practice. You have to practice these things. So to look at the time spent on practicing as a waste of time in painting is not, that's just what you have to be able to practice. So you've got 2 options. Number one is just paint all the time and don't care what happens to the models. Like if you do a unit of 10 guardsmen, you screw them up real bad and they just don't look good, you could either then strip them and paint them again, or you could say, well, at least they got paint on them, and then go on to the next models and just keep moving forward. That's the practice, and that's what makes it happen. But yeah, generally you can always strip the paint off of models. Like I screwed up bad by using an old can of black primer, and it just completely powdered this Reaper Bones miniature. And it's like it's not the white Reaper Bones, they call it Reaper Bones Black, so it's the nicer plastic. And I really like this model. It's really cool and interesting looking. And then I sprayed it. It was just like, oh man. And it's just so yeah, just throw it in the stuff, and then do it again. So, but yeah, practice is important. And again, like I said, you can't ruin a mini. You can always start over. So, hey, my fellow minions, could we get Uncle Adam some more likes? Well, that's, if you want to, that's cool. But I appreciate it, Ben. I miss the easy-to-build models of Blood Reavers and Blood Warriors. They were a great basis for conversions. They were pretty cool models. I mean, you could probably find some of them on eBay, I bet. Uncle Adam, I think I heard before, you said before that you keep your airbrushes in liquid. Is that all the time? Well, except when I'm using them, but yes. Like right now, both my airbrushes are sitting in an ultrasonic cleaner down in my little weird Harry Potter under the basement stairs airbrush room. And yeah, they stay in fluid. They stay in water. It's like probably 3/4 distilled water and maybe a quarter airbrush cleaner, which I just use I think it's made by Iowata, I believe, and I just buy it in big 32-ounce bottles online every once in a while, and it's got like a little squeezy top, and all that stuff. But yeah, I that's what I use. They sit in there and they don't rust because they're made out of like brass and stuff like that. So yeah, that's how that works. And then I never have clogs ever because the paint never dries in the brush. That's what causes clogs, is when paint dries in the brush. And if the brush is underwater, the paint never dries. It just sort of dissipates over time, especially if you're using an ultrasonic. You don't have to use an ultrasonic. I've had friends, I first learned this from my friend, it's actually Sam's brother, John, who was showing me airbrushing back years and years ago, and he's like, here, we'll airbrush that. I'm like, okay. And he went and grabbed a jar off the shelf that was full of this kind of dirty water, and then just started pulling the airbrush components out of it. And I was just like, he's like, yeah, well, if it doesn't ever get dry, then it can't ever get clogged. Now, you don't have to put all the parts in there. The only parts you have to put in the water are the main body of the airbrush, With this part, got the little thing that goes down to the hose, and it's got the cup on the top, like that part. Throw that in the water, and then there's like 2 nozzles on the front generally, and that's all you got to do. The trigger, the springy thing in the back, all that junk, the needle, that stuff doesn't need to stay in the water because that stuff can't. Well, some of it doesn't ever get paint on it, and like the needle gets paint on it, but you just take it out, you just wipe it off, and then set it someplace to dry, and it won't clog that way. So yeah, that's the way to do it. It makes it so that your stuff, you don't have to worry about it. Esther says War Machine might be a good 2D war game. Well, that's a good point. Most tournaments and competitive play use 2D terrain, and all the models have a specified base size that line of sight is drawn to, and all the rules are in the app. Well, that's a good point. If you do want to get more into 2D style kind of wargaming, then yeah, that's a good point. War Machine would be good for that. Because yeah, if you go to any kind of tournaments and stuff like that, the terrain is almost never 3-dimensional. It's just little flat, like super thin kind of like mouse pad material, that neoprene stuff, and they just print this is a swamp or this is a whatever, that kind of stuff on there. I'm thinking about doing a Zenithal on terrain. Waste of time? No, not at all. I mean, the Warcry terrain that I did recently is technically Zenithal. Like, what I did with my Warcry terrain, and I don't have any of it here to show you, but I've shown it on Twitch a bunch of times. I just primed everything black outside with the rattle can. In that situation, I will use rattle can specifically on terrain for 2 reasons. Number 1 is the terrain's a lot bigger, so I feel like I'm wasting less paint. Number 2, very frequently the rattle can stuff that I use is designed to stick to plastic really, really well, and I feel that it's better to have a primer that sticks to plastic really well when it's terrain, because you're bumping it around, you're putting models on it, you're scraping stuff along it, so I want stuff to stick better. Anyway, primed it black, and then I brought it in the house, and then I used my airbrush and like a medium gray, and then I kind of zenithaled it by basically spraying down at it. I didn't try to get it into all the nooks and crannies. I sprayed, like if this is the piece of terrain, these walls and stuff like that, and platforms, if I sprayed down at it, then the gray paint only hits the raised parts and doesn't get into the undercuts and stuff like that, and it automatically builds in a shadow. And then the next highlight level that I did from that wasn't even with an airbrush, it was with the big honkin' makeup brush and a lighter gray. Yeah, so it works out really well. And you could even, honestly, if you wanted to, you could completely skip the airbrush in that situation. You could just go outside, rattle cannon all black, and then just use big makeup brushes to do the 2 different layers of highlights. The folks from Artists, not Artist with a T on the end, but Artists with an S on the end, Artists Opus, they make brushes and other kind of stuff. They've done, if you check them out on YouTube, they've done they did a tutorial about how to paint Warcry terrain just with their dry brushes, which basically same techniques if you were going to use cheap makeup brushes. But yeah, it looks cool and it's fast. That's the thing that's also a big deal about it. Like if you were to go through and paint that entire model thing like gray, right? So you were going to paint your Warcry terrain, for example, gray, like with a rattle can gray because it's stone and it should be gray. Okay, great. And now you want to darken up stuff and things like that, then you've got to go through and put a bunch of wash in there, and you do all that, and then go back and highlight other parts and do all this stuff, and it can be a giant pain. Like I cranked through all the stone parts in my Warcry terrain so fast because I was using, admittedly, some airbrush, but also a lot of the makeup brush. It just worked out really well. Do you have to do anything special to the models before priming Reaper Bones? People have talked about that. I've never found a problem. I've just primed Reaper Bones with the normal rattle can stuff that I use, and I've never had trouble. But other people have been like, "Oh, you have to use the right stuff, or there's this, or primer doesn't stick to it." I've never come across that. Now, admittedly, the normal white Reaper Bones, I have maybe painted a total of maybe 5 of those. Like when that first big, huge Reaper Bones Kickstarter came out, and I was like, oh, I kind of want to because I want these like 12 models. And I'm like, yeah, but then I'm going to pay this much money and get 250 models. I'm like, oh, I'll just flip them on eBay. Then I'll be making money. And then I thought, everyone else is going to do that too. Because at that point, there were like $1 million worth of like Kickstarter or whatever. This is again back in like, I don't know, 2013 or 14 or whatever, when they did their very first Kickstarter. So what I did instead was I bought just the models I wanted once they came out in stores, and that was easier. But yeah, I've never had trouble with the rattle can stuff that I use for primer. At least I don't know that I've ever airbrush primered onto. No, I must have. Yeah, I'm 98% sure I've done that. So anyway, I've not had the problem about it, but sometimes, yeah. Let's see here. Thank you for going over your airbrush submerging technique. I was trolling through your old vids trying to find mention of it. Yeah, that's the thing. Should you thin down your GW airbrush paints when using them in an airbrush? If so, with what? Well, no. That's kind of the idea, is that generally you don't need to... If they make the GW airbrush paints, if it says air on the bottle, you should be able to somehow dump it straight into your airbrush, even though those pots are not great for that. But yeah, that's the idea, is that those are pre-thinned to go right into your airbrush. Let's see here. I understand the concept of Zenithal highlights, and I've made it work with airbrushing inks, but I'm not noticing a difference when I use acrylic paints with brushes. Am I missing something? I mean, the thing is that if you do Zenithal highlighting and then paint opaque paints over it, you probably generally won't notice a difference. Some people will do it because it then gives them a visual representation as they're going through and kind of helps them figure out where the highlights would break and then go into the midtones and the shadows and stuff like that. And that's fine. Like if it's a visual reference, you do it that way. But in my opinion, if you're going to do the Zenithal highlights, then the colors that you should be putting over the majority of the model should be transparent, whether they are washes, potentially in some situations, or they should be glazes, or they should be like Citadel contrast colors. You could use, I've used a lot of the Secret Weapon Miniatures washes, which are technically more like glazes, but there's a lot of options. But the benefit to using those transparent colors over that black and white blend makes that's the benefit. If you put opaque colors over the Zenithal highlighting, then the Zenithal highlighting will be covered up by opaque colors. Again, you could use them as a visual representation to help you figure out where your blending might need to be, but I think personally it's just a better idea to just use transparent colors so that the black and white work that you did initially actually shines through. Now, obviously, when you're using metallics and things like that, so like if you've got a person that you've done the black and white Zenithal highlighting to or whatever, but they've got a sword and it's supposed to be a metal sword, you're going to probably do that towards the end, and that metallic is going to cover up any black and white, but it's okay. But yeah, that's kind of the trick. Hey, Uncle Adam, do you think the games companies will look to design more single-player games given the pandemic? I mean, we've seen a decent amount of single-player add-ons that have been plopped onto some games. It'll be interesting to see, though. That's a very good question. I don't know. Let's see here. Airbrush, let's see. Airbrush diluting depends on the airbrush's needle size and tank pressure. I guess those paints are usually diluted for 0.3 needle size or so. Smaller needles might need thinning. I mean, potentially, you can thin those models down a little bit if you want to, but yeah. Genuine Vision says, I came all the way to Adepticon last year, from Ireland, I might add, just so I could pick up some of the Secret Weapon washes. They are really nice, though. Yeah, I like them a lot. I own the set, and I'm really happy with them. I use them all the time for over Zenithal. I really like them a lot. Noob question about base layers with a brush. What size brush would you regularly use? I mean, it's a personal preference thing, frankly. I generally paint with larger brushes because I don't like really tiny brushes. And the reason I don't like really tiny brushes is because they don't usually hold any paint. Like you have to, if you're using a super, super, super tiny little brush, you make like 2 brush strokes and you have to go back and get more paint. And then 2 brush strokes and a little bit more, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I generally like a thicker or bigger brush. Something with a bigger belly, but a really fine point, so I can get the control that I want, stuff like that. But it'll still carry a decent amount of paint in the reservoir, as it were. Sundered Psyche says, I'm meant to be painting here, and Matthew Sears has got me fixed on potato salad. I don't have any potatoes, and it's nearly 11 p.m. I don't think I can get any until tomorrow morning. Well, Besides wargaming, what other interests do you have in games? Gloomhaven, Simon. I'm not super into board games too much. Yeah, I just don't. I just don't play much in the way of board games. My wife's a little bit more interested in board games than I am. She likes some of these really, really incredibly boring train games, and I don't mean Ticket to Ride. I mean stuff like Euro Rails and Empire Builder and India Rails and China Rails and stuff that Mayfair used to make. I don't even know if they still do anymore. Well, Mayfair's not technically around anymore. They got bought. But anyway, so yeah, I did play. I mean, when I first started, I was I like in 5th grade, I got into D&D, and then did a little bit of that on and off for a little while. Got into BattleTech in middle school, so like 7th grade-ish, roughly 6th, 7th grade, somewhere in there. And then did that for a while, and then I started getting into miniatures in the late 90s a little bit, and then didn't much, and then got into it a lot heavier in the mid 90s. Like, I was real into video games for quite a while. Me and a friend used to run a LAN party. And like our first LAN party, we started out, I think there were 5 people. And then and that was in like late 1998. We were playing a lot of Quake 2 and stuff like that. And then eventually we got it to the point, I think our last LAN party was in 2004 or 2005, but we got to the point where we had, I think our biggest LAN party ever, we had 98 people. So yeah, we were doing it like every other month or quarterly or something like that. We didn't have a great schedule, but we were doing them. We did 20 plus, I think, of them, and they were a lot of fun. Anyway, and now I sometimes play on consoles, but I haven't been doing a lot of video gaming lately. But I haven't played an RPG in a long time either. Yeah, the Cool Mini or Not games, I don't know. Zombicide's kind of cool. I don't own it, though. Biggest brush you can use for base coating while still getting everything. I use a flat brush that's about 1/4 inch wide. Oh, wow. Let's see here. Learned a long time ago those tiny brushes are pretty useless. Paint often dries on the bristles before you get it to the model. Yeah, that's also a problem. That is true. How old is 5th grade? Well, I think I was 7 when I went into the 1st grade. So 5th grade is 10? 11? I don't know. 11 maybe. I'm not sure. My eyesight is not so great these days to use Zenithal highlights so I can see the mini as I paint. Oh, it's not so great, so I use Zenithal highlights so I can see the mini as I paint. Yeah, that helps a lot too, because, you know, if you just prime a mini black, it is hard to sometimes see the detail, but when you've primed it that way, even if you're going to be covering over that black and white kind of like, you know, it just pops the detail out more so you can see it a little bit better while you're painting. There are painters that are doing it that way too. Uncle Adam origin story, I bet he was bitten by a radioactive space marine. No, like actually like the way I got into miniatures for the most part was Space Hulk. A friend of mine, when we were in college in the early 90s, 91-ish or so, he was like, hey, you've ever heard of this game? And he pulled out Space Hulk. We at that time were playing, he was running an RPG, he was running old school Rollmaster, which was made by Iron Crown Enterprises. Some people called it Chartmaster. There was a lot of charts. And we were playing in Middle Earth, and so we were playing, and we were also playing Car Wars on Friday nights. And so that was a lot of fun. And then he was like, hey, have you ever heard of this game? And he pulls out Space Hulk. And just reading through the instructions and stuff like that, there was like a little bit of fluff just interspersed here and there in between things. And I was just really fascinated. And so, yeah, that's where that went. LAN parties are so 90s. Oh, yeah, 90s and early 2000s, absolutely. It was a lot of fun, though. It was a good time. We did, yeah, like we were playing. I remember when Battlefield 1942, the very first version of Battlefield ever, like we would get together we would set everything up on Friday, and then Saturday morning at 10 a.m. is when everybody would start to show up for the LAN party, and then we would go nonstop from Saturday morning until Sunday, like afternoon, 5 o'clock p.m. People would sleep in, like we would rent this like expo hall, and people would sleep there and stuff like that, and it was great. But one Friday afternoon, like as we were starting to get things set up, EA released this demo for this game called Battlefield 1942, and it was just that map, Wake Island. If you ever played Battlefield 1942, you probably remember Wake Island, but it was just that. And previous to that, we've been playing like Counter-Strike and stuff like that, and there was this map that came out for Counter-Strike that was just like a beta weird map where there was like this one Jeep you could sort of drive around, but it would frequently get stuck in the ground, and we had just played the heck out of that map one night, like till 5 o'clock in the morning. Just a whole bunch of people. Like there were other people who were sleeping and stuff like that. There were a lot of people at these things, like I said. But just the fact that it was a first-person shooter, but it had a vehicle in it, that was so cool. Even though it was completely broken and janky. And then when Battlefield 1942, that initial demo came out that everybody could download for free, and the fact that you could drive tanks, jeeps, you could fly airplanes, there were boats, like all that stuff in one map. That's all we played. We played that single map for a day and a half nonstop. That's all it, like there were, again, like we're probably at that point 60, 70, 80 people at this, and we were just playing it all. We obviously couldn't all play on the same server because the server was, but we had multiple servers running. It was just crazy. Like that game blew us away, and it was a hoot. It was a super great weekend. One of the first mini games I ever played was the first edition of Advanced Space Crusade. My friends and I had a great time with that game. I've heard about that, but yeah. Any thoughts on painting stripped minis in Zenithal priming for selling instead of leaving bare plastic? So you strip the mini and then you do the Zenithal. I mean, there might be some people who like it, who prefer that. You could give it a try if you're like going to try to flip it on eBay, I mean. On the other hand, you may also have people who are like, yeah, but you didn't do the Zenithal the way I like it, But yeah, it might be something to try. Rollmaster was not good. As the person who didn't have to be the GM, it seemed fine to me. There was lots of fun charts sometimes to roll on that had lots of crazy descriptions of like what happened. But my friend Peter was very good at running it, so it seemed fine. But I think if you were a relatively new GM or something like that, or just weren't used to the system, it's a steep hill to climb. LAN parties were great. Spending all night goofing around with your friends and crashing afterwards. Yeah, I did a lot of that. Battlefield 1942 was so damn good. It was great. Yeah, it was great. Sleeping at the con, who would do that? Well, I was in my late 20s, question mark? Well, late 20s, and then eventually, when the heck? I must have turned 30 in 2001, I think. Anyway, so yeah, I was not a young person particularly. I was not a kid. So I would still sleep usually, but there would be like, the other guy that I ran with, like that he and I both ran this thing. Like he would stay, one of us would stay awake, and then the other one would take a nap for a while, just so that nobody did anything stupid or too stupid. I gunked up the brush I was using for metallics, so I haven't been able to finish my first Space Marines. Can't wait for my brush cleaner to arrive later today. Nice. Well, I hope it works out well for you. I remember when Battlefield demo came out, we played that in the student house with 5 people as well. It blew our minds as well. Good times. Oh, yeah. I mean, just the fact that you could get into a fighter. I think, was there also a bomber in that map? Oh, man. It was amazing. That's what I want a 40K game to be. I want a 40K game that is basically Battlefield, except it's multiple people in a Razorback or multiple people in a, I don't know, Storm Raven. I don't know. Like, or just, and, same with whatever Eldar dudes drive around in. I don't know, those super killer hover tanks that have 100 guns on them and all that kind of stuff. Like that, that's what I want. And I know there have been some games out there that have been sort of like it, but like I want a big AAA studio to build one of those. And I think the GW does too. I swear I just saw a headline recently where the GW was like, we want more AAA games based off of our IP, thank you. Now, I don't know what you need to do to make that happen, but I would like to see it as well. So that would be pretty cool. Zenithal is usually kind of chalky looking. I can imagine that getting undue complaints. I guess it depends on how you do it. The way I've been doing my Zenithal lately is I like to use, and this is a tip that I got from Caleb Wissenbeck, who's a pro. Instead of using white paint, you actually use Liquitex acrylic white ink, but you need to put a little bit of matte varnish into it as well. Now, the reason for this, and I think I talked about this maybe last episode or the episode before, the reason for this is because, and it's mainly based on contrast paints. If you take contrast paints and put it over regular, just acrylic white ink, it will screw up the ink. But if you put some matte varnish into the ink, that like helps protect the ink, actually. I'm not saying you spray matte varnish over it afterwards. I'm saying you actually just add matte varnish into the ink, and then it protects the ink from whatever in the contrast paint is potentially sometimes screwing up the acrylic ink. But doing that, I have done that on all my models recently that I've been doing Zenithal highlight with, and the ink does not give a splattery kind of chalky, because white primer in an airbrush can be a little chalky, but the white ink, it's nice. And like I said, it's got no problems with contrast when you put a little bit of matte varnish in there too. So there you go. Stephen Condon says, "Oh, what Eternal Crusade was going to be?" There was Eternal Crusade was getting there, but it just wasn't. And again, not a big you need several hundred people working on a game like that to make it really like AAA generally, where everything just like the net code works perfectly and everything and the animations are all perfect and you know what I mean? But yeah, or pretty close to perfect. Wave Serpent. Ah, yes, the old Wave Serpent. Ah, from Kevin Peters, the man with all of the Wave Serpents. Yes, how you doing? Seems ridiculous that there hasn't been an exceptional 40K game other than Dawn of War. Yeah. Untold Sacrifices to the Dark Gods are required to produce a AAA game, says Esther. Yeah, no, that's probably... And also, like, tons of money, if that's what you mean by Untold Sacrifices to the Dark Gods. Kind of the same thing. A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. My band Super Killer Hover Tank actually opens for Post Malone in Detroit soon. Nice. But there won't be anybody at that show. I mean, because of the COVID, not because of the bands. That's just, whatever. I was born in 75, and basically your gamer arc resonates a lot, though I stayed with D&D. Yeah, I didn't really. I did, like, for a while when I was younger, and then I did play... in late college I played, then I played, like I said, Rollmaster in college. But in late college into early post-college, then I played some Shadowrun. And then played a little bit of 40K, or not 40K, a little bit more D&D, like in the early 2000s with some friends, like my wife included. And then we kind of stopped, and so I haven't done it for a long time. VJ Morph says, yeah, don't be as stupid as Morph. Put varnish in your ink before putting contrast over it. Yeah, I don't know what it is in the contrast that messes with acrylic ink, but you want to evidently put just a little bit of matte varnish in there, a couple drops or whatever into the cup on the top of your airbrush, and then boom, there you go. Been staring at some styrofoam for a week, trying to decide what terrain it would be. Inspired by today's title, I just started cutting. Yeah, I mean... The only thing about styrofoam is that you need to figure out a way to seal it, because if you just try to use a rattle can to prime it, the rattle can propellant will melt it. So just keep that in mind. You can use just brush watered down PVA on it once you get it cut to the shape you want, and then paint over it with anything pretty much, and then it's fine. But yeah. Jonathan Kennedy says Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine. That was probably one of the better, like, it was almost AAA. It was pretty close. And that was pretty good, but I kind of want... Like, that was a cool third-person run-around kind of game. I want a first-person, big, huge Battlefield-style game. Call of Duty, I guess. But Battlefield, I've always been a little bit bigger fan. I think that would be... I think that's cool, so... Question, have you ever played the GW Lord of the Rings tabletop game? I have not, but I own the most recent main core book. I bought it a couple of years ago at... the Nova Open when it first was released. It's a nice looking book. Yeah. Uncle Ed, what do you think is the best tabletop wargaming system rule set? Or rather, what's your favorite? I think that's probably the more important question, is what's my favorite? I mean, I don't know. I don't even know if I have a favorite. I like Kill Team a lot. I like Warcry a lot. I've been liking Planet 28 quite a bit. Star Breach. Those are both indie games that are sci-fi skirmish. But yeah, that seems to be the way that I kind of go on that. Although, like I said, I'm starting to kind of get into Necromunda a bit too. Michael says, thank you for all your videos. I've been obsessively watching them as I prepare to jump into the hobby. I'm about to build and paint my first minis for Rangers of Shadow Deep. Nice. That's also a good game. Absolutely. Yeah. So, like, the subject of today's video, which is about taking chances with the hobby. So, like, that model there that was in that picture that I just showed you for a split second. There you go. So, again, like I said, these are from a set called The Unquiet Dead, and it's expansion for a game called Wildlands, which is kind of a gateway game, so it's a little board gamey, but it's got a little bit of miniature thing going on. And it's made by Osprey. But when I talk about taking chances, like those models, if you go back on Twitch and watch the video on demand, or whatever, the recordings of me working on those models from last weekend, like, it's a black and white Zenithal, but I didn't use a rattle can or an airbrush. I used the big honkin' makeup brush to do the job of doing the white over the black, and that was kind of taking a chance, especially since I was doing it live right there on the internets. But that was not such a concern. It was a very different way for me to paint, because I'm usually getting in there and making sure that I've either got some sort of spray, whether it's rattle can, airbrush, whatever, to do that stuff, and trying to use that kind of Zenithal look came from the relative success of doing the exact same type of thing with those Necrons previously, where I used, instead of a white to black Zenithal highlight, I used silver to black Zenithal highlight on those Necrons. And then, again, that was done, the silver was done with the makeup brush. So, you know, it's that kind of stuff. Like, taking chances, I think, is important. And it goes back to something I said earlier in the show, which is you can't ruin a mini. I mean, well, okay, if you try to strip the paint off of a resin mini and you use acetone, you will get soup. You will not get a mini back. So that will technically ruin a mini. But as long as you don't do that, like if you're using metal minis, or if you're using even plastic minis and using normal stripping stuff like LA's Totally Awesome or Simple Green or Super Clean or any of those, isopropyl alcohol, you will not be able to ruin a mini. They can always be, at the very least, they can be just reprimed. You know, like if you painted it and you don't like the color of it, you could just reprime it and paint it and start painting again. You could also strip it and then reprime it, but whatever. Depends on how thick you put the paint on in the initial, try. But I think it's also important to some degree. Like, I talk a lot about how, the way that I paint, I don't ever paint, like elfin princesses and stuff like that, because I frequently start with a black primer. I frequently start with, I do a lot of, I like to do enamel washes, which makes everything real grungy and brown and dark and whatnot. But I like that look. I should probably try to do some elfin princesses at some point to see if I can do it, and that's kind of taking a chance. I'm working on this Yeti right now, which obviously is not an elfin princess, but it's also something I did not prime black. It's something I didn't use an enamel wash on. It's something I'm not using a lot of, I'm barely using washes on it at all, actually. He's got these kind of horns, and I've used some sepia wash over some kind of khaki color on those horns, but that's about it. I've not done a lot of washes on him. So just kind of trying to find ways to sort of stretch yourself a little bit and take some chances and try it out, understanding that no matter what, you can always strip that model and start over again if you need to. And that's fine. I think it's important because it teaches you new things. Like this whole kind of dry brushing the Zenithal highlight with the makeup brush has worked out really well, and I think that I'm probably going to make a video about it, because there are plenty of people out there who hear me talk about that, but they're like, yeah, but I don't have an airbrush, or I don't even, I haven't had any luck trying to do it with 2 rattle cans where you spray everything black, let it sit for 10 minutes, and then spray from above, or whatever. So, or maybe you can't even spray prime. Maybe you can only brush on black primer due to where you live or the weather or who knows what. Maybe you live in a big apartment building and you don't have a place like a driveway or a parking lot or anything where you can just go outside and set up some, like a cardboard box or whatever. Whatever. But so finding those things, taking those types of chances is a good thing. Right now, I should have done this before I started. Right now, I am actually, yesterday what I worked on besides that big Yeti was also I'm doing some work with metal models, which I don't normally do. Pig Iron Productions. There we go. So let me go here, and go... Where's the button? Here it is. That's the one. Okay. So this is not an ad, but I painted a bunch of these models a number of years ago, and just did a lousy job. It was when I first started, and I was happy with it at the time. But like, at least I know one set of these models, I sprayed a primer on there that was so powdery that they looked like they were furry, and then I was just like, nah, it'll be fine, and I just left them, and I didn't, you know what I mean? So now, and I don't even know where those models are, frankly, right now, but I just recently almost got a wild hair and decided I wanted to start working on some metal models again, just to give it a try, see what it's like. And so I ended up ordering actually a bunch of different models from this company, from Pig Iron Productions. Some of these are one-piece models. Some of them are mostly one-piece, but the head is separate, so you got to glue the head on there. And I find it hard to kind of work with metal models in some situations. The glue can be problematic in certain places, and I just don't have a great amount of luck with it in the past. So I'm looking into using these. Like, these models are all traditionally sculpted. They're not computer sculpted. So they're a lot chunkier. There's less detail in a lot of places. And like I said, they're kind of harder to work with, just as far as the glue and stuff like that. Like, these guys are, again, maybe just the heads. But there are some where there are models... let me see here. Where are we at? Heavy infantry, maybe? I think I ordered a set of... Yeah, this assault squad I ordered as well. And, like, these guys... I know this guy, like, this gun is not attached. So, like, he's just basically got the end of a sleeve here and the end of a sleeve here, and that gun is otherwise... I got to glue that on. Well, I'm going to probably have to pin it, so I'm going to have to drill in there and all that kind of stuff, just so it doesn't fall off. And I can't remember if these heads are separate or not on these models, but, like, it's... Working with metal I find to be problematic, but I still want to give it a try again, because I want to use these models potentially for, again, those, miniatures agnostic skirmish games that I keep talking about, which I need to make a video about that now, even though I've made a video a while ago about, like, what does use whatever models you want mean? Well, what it means is basically the same thing as miniatures agnostic, but people hear the term miniatures agnostic and they're like, what does that mean? So I think I should probably make a video about that. Nonetheless, I kind of want to use these guys for probably Planet 28, honestly. Maybe Star Breach as well. They're not maybe quite as sci-fi as they should be, maybe for Star Breach, but also, like, they come with these integrated bases where they've just got, like, this sort of, like, lump of a base. And I've either got to go and cut the base away from their feet so that I can glue them to a normal plastic base that I like, or I've got to glue them to a normal base that I like, which is what I'm doing, and then use green stuff to kind of sculpt up along the edges to give them so they don't just look like a weird base glued to a flat plastic base. So, again, we're getting into, like, I'm not great with green stuff, so I'm going to be kind of pushing myself on that. And once I get these guys built and primed and whatnot, I'm going to definitely probably end up using them on Twitch as paint jobs there. The thing that's going to be interesting as well, two things. Number one, painting non-GW models on Twitch, is that going to pull in as many views as painting GW models? I don't know, but that'll be an interesting experiment. Second thing, I will be doing these guys with Zenithal highlighting and all of that stuff, which when I painted these guys initially, I swear at least one set of these guys that I painted, I dipped. Now, for those of you who don't know what that means, back in the day before Army Painter was around, Army Painter makes these cans of, like, this kind of, like, colored varnish, like this kind of, I don't know, walnut style, and you could take a model, paint it up a little bit, and it's almost like putting a wash on a model, but instead you actually dip it in there, and then it's really glossy. It's like a polyurethane. Back in the day, before that company was around, people used Minwax that you would get from the hardware store. It was problematic, let's just say that, but, it was the thing. So I'm not going to do that this time. So these guys will hopefully look better because I will be using, like I said, like the Zenithal highlight and everything like that. But yeah, this is what my next project that I'm doing, because I wanted to, number one, there's a touch of nostalgia because I've painted some of these models before and I just like the kind of chunky non-computeriness of them a little bit. But also, again, I wanted to see if I could make them look a lot better now that I'm a better painter, and I want to try to just take some chances by working with metal miniatures and going down that road. So yeah, I don't know. They're interesting models, and I bought a bunch. I bought some of these heavy infantry, and I bought a bunch of these colony models, which there are some ferals in there that I picked up, and then some colony. I think I bought this. Maybe did I buy this? I might have bought this. Yeah. I think this is the one actually I was building last night. This is the militia booster pack. So there's just all these guys with the same rifle over and over again, but they're kind of like, they're a little greatcoat infantry sort of looking, whereas the ferals are very, like, their outfits are all ripped up and beat up and all that kind of stuff. There's rebels, there's ferals, and then there's the militia. So it's just a neat system. There's no game that's attached to this. They don't have rules for anything. They just make these models. But yeah, so that's partially what I'm doing here in the situation to try to get, take some chances, as it were. So yeah, let's see where we're at here. It's give and take on GW Minis on Twitch. Creature Caster is popular as well. It just depends. Well, that makes sense too. Yeah, I do have a Creature Caster model called the Butcher, who's like not like a big, huge, like a lot of the Creature Caster models are very big display pieces. This is a lot smaller, like nearly 28. I mean, he's bigger than a 28 millimeter model, but he's in the 28 millimeter scale. He's just very tall, for 28 millimeters. So I have him, but I have not built him yet. If that heavy gun touches the figure's abdomen, pin it there instead of the wrists. It's easier and more stable. I don't think it does. It's because like I said, I'm pretty sure I've built that guy in the past, and he's one of the really super fuzzy models. But when I saw that model, I'm like, I think I had to pin him, because the thing that's weird is that the pins are going in different directions, because one hand is holding it like this, and the other hand is holding it like this. So there's one pin that's coming out of this wrist, and there's another pin that's going down out of that wrist, and I do remember that being squirrely. So that'll also be fun. I've just published a miniatures agnostic wargame. I'm excited to hear your opinion on those sort of rule sets. I like a lot of that kind of stuff. I like miniatures agnostic stuff just because then I can buy the models that I want to use and use them in the way that I want to use them, as opposed to saying, oh, well, you're supposed to use this model with this game, or you're supposed to use these models with that game, or whatever. I like having more options, frankly, and being able to buy models that I think are cool. So the one chance I haven't taken as much as I would like is converting minis. I always feel I don't have enough cash to buy 2 models to ruin in the hope that the mashup will be good. I mean, kit bashing, yeah, I mean, that can be kind of a thing, is that if you are... Honestly, if you start out just head swaps, like if you can, like very frequently, specifically with Games Workshop games, but there's other games as well out there that'll do this. They will give you a kit to make, let's say, 5 or 10 miniatures, right? But they will frequently give you more heads. Sometimes, depending on the manufacturer, a lot more heads. And the reason is they're not just giving you more heads in case you lose some, although sometimes I guess that's maybe possible, but it's because they're giving you options. Like, heads with caps on, heads without the caps on, heads with the helmets, heads with the visor up, that kind of stuff. So that way you can kind of customize your own miniatures. When you build those miniatures and then you send them off to battle or do whatever, the rest of those heads that are on that sprue you want to save, because at some point you're going to be like, I want this model, but I'm not happy with the head. You put a different head on there. And that's at the very earliest, lowest levels, that's kit bashing. Another thing is, if you do want to start practicing kit bashing and you're concerned about money, go on to eBay. Go on to eBay, find a bunch of junk, a bunch of models, and then just, for cheap, and then start kit bashing from there and practicing with it, I've done a ton of that. Like, I've bought a bunch of models in the past and then been like, all right, well, this guy, I'm just going to rip his head right off. Sometimes you can throw it into like a Simple Clean or something like that, or LA's Totally Awesome, which will sometimes break down the glue. Other times you will... if you know that it was glued together with super glue, which is hard to tell, frankly, but sometimes if you know it's been glued together with super glue, you can frequently just throw a model in the freezer for like a day, and then the glue will get brittle enough you can just pull the parts apart. So there's that. But if it's plastic cement, then you can't. It won't work. So it's something to look at. But yeah, definitely like go onto eBay and find stuff and just practice with that. As far as I tell people to practice on eBay things for painting, but also for converting and kit bashing. So yeah, definitely. I hate pinning models, says Cry Havoc Wargaming. Yeah, I am not a big fan of it either, which is one of the reasons why I don't generally use metal models too much. But sometimes it's important, you know. And sometimes it's not that hard either. Like, honestly, that gun, I bet I could just pin one of the two wrists, probably the one that goes out straight this way, and that would probably be enough. I don't think I would need to pin both of them. It's not a load-bearing gun. Like, it's not like it's super crazy heavy. These guys are very small, so, you know, there's that. I'm waiting for Artist Opus to do a tutorial on using the D-Series to do a devilfish. I've been told it's coming, and I want that damn thing off my painting table. That'd be interesting. I'd like to see how they do that. I had to pin some of my bigger warjacks for War Machine. Not a fan. Oh yeah, no. Pinning warjacks, especially the metal ones, was a necessity. Yeah, that was definitely a thing. Jonathan says, I love Frostgrave for the aspect of being able to use whatever figures you want to build warbands with. Absolutely, yeah. I only have 2 Frostgrave warbands, but they are a mixture of Reaper Bones, some Kitbash GW, some Reaper Metals. I think that's it. Yeah. The guy who was in the thumbnail of my Friday video, that guy with the big mustache and the sword and the shield and the blue sky behind him and all that stuff, that guy is from one of my Frostgrave warbands. I think he's a metal model, and I think he's from Reaper, but I'm not 100% sure. Gary says, thank you, Uncle Adam. I was out of Warhammer for 10 years and got back in with the Indomitus box that I got with the made to order. Bought some Immortals to start painting and using your guide as a base. Well, good. Good luck with that. Have fun. Yeah, I like painting those Necrons. They're a lot of fun. Steven says, eBay Rehab is a great skill builder. Yeah, I agree, definitely. I am new to the hobby and interested in kit bashing, but I want to be able to use models for play at GW stores after the pandemic. Has GW ever made it clear where the line is, or is this a worry? I don't have a GW store anywhere real close to me, so I've never played at them before. I have heard that they're not super keen on having non-GW models in the store, but I don't know what that means with kit bashing. Maybe somebody else in the chat can help you with that, but that I don't know. We eventually, like soon, like end of this month, we will have a GW store a little closer to me, but still it's like a 45-minute drive. But that'll be the closest one to me in the state. So I tried to pin my Cypher to the base to start with, didn't get the angle right, almost split him in half. Well, that's not good. You don't want that. Currently working on a custom Skaven hero with the Age of Sigmar Anvil of Apotheosis. There's a lot of taking chances during construction. Yeah, I mean, building custom models from scratch, I mean, not like sculpting them, but like real serious kit bashing where you're like, all right, we're going to completely change out the arms and this and that, and we're going to take this leg and it's straight, but we want it to be bent because we want it to be kneeling. And so, yeah, like that takes a lot of practice and work, but that's why you do it, is you practice so that you can get better at it. Definitely. Being able to choose my models in Rangers of Shadowdeep and Frostgrave has brought me back into fantasy miniatures from exclusively World War II 28mm. Having a blast finding miniatures. Yeah. Honestly, Reaper has got this great figure finder, I think they call it on their website, where you can go through and start off and be like, all right, I'm looking for a man or a woman or a vampire or a skeleton or whatever. You can, and you can check these boxes and say, I'm looking for a man with a sword and a shield and chainmail, and then they will show you the 4 different models in their catalog that fit those criteria. So it's actually really helpful for trying to find stuff through Reaper. And they've been making models for so long, they may not even have that model in stock anymore, but at least now you know that model exists, so you can like search around on eBay and places like that. So it's actually, that's a really nice thing that Reaper has for that. The figure finder, I think, is what they call it. Matthew Sears says, I've stopped working with sculptors in the past because they were just like, well, have them pin it instead of fixing something to be one piece. Yeah, no, I can understand that, definitely. I made a wash, more of a thin paint, uses various mediums and additives, inks and metallic pigments. Used on black or silver, it gives the effect of scorched steel. Used on purple, it makes it glow. Oh, that's kind of cool. Sounds neat, yeah. Anyone remember the old metal Thunderhawk? You could pin that thing all day and it would still fall to pieces as soon as you looked at it. I never saw one of those, but I know I've got friends who've tried to build specific Forge World vehicles, and which are resin instead of metal, but there's still a lot of pinning and clamping, and yeah, that can be problematic in some situations. I use the Zombicide minis for Frostgrave. Works okay. Yeah, they're maybe just a touch small, maybe, but I don't think you'll notice that much with zombies. It'll just look like they're skinny zombies. It's fine. Oh, that was a big jump. What happened there? Gaddis Gaming, hey, how you doing? Uncle Adam, I've had good luck with third-party kits to make some unique Imperial Guard, Anvil Industries, Mad Bob miniatures, and Puppets War. Have been really good pieces to use. I've used Anvil Industries. I bought heads and stuff from them, and Puppets War. Not heard of Mad Bob miniatures. I'll have to take a look at that. Miniature agnostic is one of the greatest trends in modern wargaming, I think. Use what you want. I mean, I think amongst the people who are willing to play more indie games, yes, absolutely. For several reasons. Number one is it allows the buyer to be able to use the models that maybe they already have, or models that they really like, or whatever, and that's great. And also, as the publisher of those games, you don't have to, like, all you have to do is publish the rules. And then you don't have to worry about the miniatures chasing down sculptors, going through all that kind of stuff. And so you can then work on a different set of rules, or you could just be cranking out rules. Like there are, look at Ganesha Games, or Ganesha, whichever, makers of Song of Blades and Heroes. Like, he produced Song of Blades and Heroes, started to get popular, and then he just started producing based off of kind of roughly the same system, but with just different. Like there's Mutants and Death Ray Guns, which is your post-apocalyptic version of it. But again, it's not just like we used exactly the same rules and we just threw some Mutants and Death Ray Guns in there. There's been modifications and tweaks. Mutants and Death Ray Guns is a little bit more campaign-focused. And then there's like Fear and Faith, which is like, it's kind of using the same sort of rule set, but it's aimed a little bit more towards zombies and vampires and being able to do kind of cool stuff like that. Almost like Buffy the Vampire Slayer type stuff. And so rather than just like, well, we have to make this game and then we have to release a new version of it every 18 months to 2 years to 3 years or whatever, so that we can keep getting people to buy stuff, which, is not everybody's cup of tea. Instead, it's just like, make this game cool. Now let's make a different version of this game, which the people who are playing this game are not being inconvenienced or because they're just like, I want to play fantasy skirmish. Great, you're going to do this. Well, I want to play stuff with the dinosaurs in it. Okay, well then there's this game. Rather than trying to make one game that works Aztecs to astronauts, which is rough. And there are games out there that do that. Oh, this game is designed to be, you can use it for any time period and have time periods fight against each other. And I'm like, it just, rather, how about just make multiple rule sets and then that gives you something to do? You know what I mean? But if you also just want to make a single game once and then be done with it and then decide what to do next, you can do that too. Yeah, I like the indie publishing thing right now. I really do. And the fact that there's so many different videos that you can go with too. Or, sorry, so many different model lines you can go with. And then you have the agnostic thing. I've been using a lot of the Game of Thrones models for my D&D NPC models. Nice. At my store in the UK, they are not keen, but if it's kit bashed, as long as it's at least 80% of the model is GW, then they're cool. Well, that's not too bad. It's evidently 100% dependent upon the manager, other people are saying as well. Let's see. I've even heard some GW stores hating on Forge World. That is super weird. Yeah, I agree. GW store here in Arizona will not let you play with non-GW models. I mean, like, I could totally see if it's like completely not an. I don't know that I could see it. I can understand why they're doing it to some degree, but yeah. Do you have any particular opinions of the new Blood Bowl, on Blood Bowl in general? Did you ever play? I have, but it hasn't been for a long time. I played Blitz Bowl a little bit a couple years ago. I own some Blood Bowl stuff. I'm kind of interested. I don't know. My wife likes football, American football, so that could be potentially a thing. I tried the video game for a while, which I kind of didn't enjoy. I don't know why. Yeah, I've thought about it. I don't know. I haven't thought super hard about it, and I don't know a ton of people around me that play it, but I have thought about it. If you want to learn to kit bash, start an orc army. That's a good point, too. Do you have any particular... Oh, no, I read that one. Oh, goodness. Mutants and death ray guns? That has an attractive ring to it. Yeah, it's... if you just... It's a Ganesha, or Ganesha, like the Indian god games. It's made by... It's a small independent game company made by a guy named Andreas Sfigoli. I'm mispronouncing that last name, possibly also the first name. But he's an Italian guy who has been making these games, and the original Song of Blades and Heroes is a great... It's the game that I always teach people at conventions, because it's a very elegant, simple system, but it does work very well. And it's like... fantasy skirmish, and you can use whatever models you want, because he doesn't really even sell models, I don't think. And you can buy it as a print on demand, or you can buy it as a PDF. But he has made a bunch of other games that are also like different time zone. Like, he's made one that's like a near future. He's made one that's like Napoleonic. He's made, like I said, more of like a zombies and vampires and werewolves and kind of version. And there's just tons of different games. And he's also gotten into some other games. Like he did this game that became very popular. He did a game for Osprey called Rogue Stars. He wrote that one too. And he did another game that became popular that he self-published called 4 Against Darkness, which is kind of like a single-player RPG, sort of. That got real popular. And then now he's made a sci-fi version of it that's called... It's either called 4 Against Mars or Mars Against Darkness. I don't know. It's got Mars in it, I think, someplace. But yeah. New Black Orcs have kit bashed knobs written all over them. Oh yeah, no, I could see that. Definitely those big kind of helmets and stuff. I could see that. Chase says, my wife enjoys American football more than I. Yeah, my wife also enjoys it more than I. And she loved the new Halloween-themed Undead team. Yeah, I heard about it. I didn't see any pictures, but I heard about it. It looks kind of cool. Ganesha, remover of obstacles. There you go. I'm taking chance with a hobby and building a Tau army. Well, they're very shooty, so if you like that, that's pretty cool. Daka Flaka Flame says, I've been reading through Of Armies and Hordes by Ganesha. Yeah, that's more of a army scale as opposed to a skirmish scale, I believe, style game. I have not looked into that. Let's see here. Andreas doesn't sell minis. Or is it Andrea or Andreas? I think it's Andrea. I don't remember. Doesn't sell minis, but he has some resembling Thundar the Barbarian and Star Frontiers alien races at alternative armies done for his Kickstarters. I know he had some mushroom people, too, at one point for a Kickstarter. I remember seeing that. Heard of Rogue Stars. I'm interested. Yeah, I think I own a copy of that. That's one of those Osprey little blue books. But yeah, he did that, too. 4 Against Darkness is cool. I picked it up online and had fun with it. Yeah, same guy who does Song of Blades and Heroes and all that stuff. Yeah. JJ says, I'm a noob to the hobby. Any tips on paints for edge highlighting or consistency? I'm struggling mightily to have paint flow correctly and come out with straight lines. Edge highlighting is hard, frankly. You want the paint to not be too thin, but also not too pasty. So it's got to be pretty liquid but still kind of opaque. And then the whole trick to it is, and you may know this already, but just in case you don't, let's say this is the tip of your brush. So here's my brush, right? The metal part and the wood part, and this is the actual bristles, right? And here's the thing I'm trying to edge highlight. The trick is to not do this with the tip, but to run the edge along the side of the brush along the edge of the thing you're trying to edge highlight. The problem is, and the reason why you want to have a real soft hand with it, is because when you press down hard, what happens is the bristles spread out, and now all of a sudden you can get a line that is like, you've got this line running along the edge, but it gets thicker or goes even a little over the edges a little bit in certain spots. And then as you try to overcompensate and pull up a little bit, you can either actually stop touching the edge, or you've got this line that goes along the edge of the thing you're trying to edge highlight that goes thick, thin, thick, thin, thick, thin, and you don't want that. So it's hard. I generally don't do it. I did edge highlight just the very edges of those Scorpec Necron blades that I did, those that they were holding, they got the big green blades. I did the very edge of that on Twitch, and I was like, I usually suck at this, so we'll see how it goes. And it worked pretty well, mostly. But it's hard to do. When I see somebody take, like, let's say they're painting, I don't know, Black Templar, and they're like, okay, so I'm going to prime them all black, and I'm going to use a gray color and edge highlight every edge on this friggin' Space Marine. Number one, it takes forever, and number two, it just doesn't look very good in most situations, especially if you've got that real waviness to it. That's why I have a tendency to instead dry brush, because that's like, if I use a makeup brush, I get a better edge highlight, in my opinion, but that's me. Edge highlighting is a real pain. That's one of those things you want to practice if you want to get better at it. The new pumpkin-headed Blood Bowl zombie or whatever it is that make the team an auto-buy for me. I just want to paint that guy and put him on my shelf to make me happy when I look at him. See, that's a big benefit to miniature painting. Like, you generally, well, I was going to say, generally you don't buy video games just to have them on your shelf, although there are plenty of people I know that have lots and lots and lots of games in their Steam library just to have them in case. So I get that, but you don't get to just look at them and like feel good about them once you've painted them, because they're video games and you can't paint video games. Anyway, hopefully this analogy makes a little bit of sense. Chris says, I found that using a synthetic brush and painting with the bristles near the ferrule, meaning the metal part, can get you razor-sharp edge highlights since the bristles don't spread. That's probably not a bad idea. I should try that myself. Closer to the, so again, if this is the brush, closer to the metal thing. So if you're doing it, the edge highlighting here, the brush is not nearly as wiggly as it is out here near the tip, right? See? You can see right there. You can tell. That's a good tip. I should try that myself, as a matter of fact. And I generally use synthetic brushes anyway, so it wouldn't be difficult for me there. Now, obviously, it's difficult when you are trying to edge highlight something. Like if it's the edge of a blade, great. But if you're trying to edge highlight something that doesn't stick far enough out, then this thing could be hitting, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, so that's a bit of an issue, but definitely. Cranked out a warband for Song of Shadows and Dust yesterday. Derivative of Song of Blades and Heroes set in ancient Rome. Oh, interesting. That's kind of cool. Tau Army is sort of organized a lot like the armies in Beyond Gates of Antares. Sort of bolt action rules for sci-fi. Yeah, I'm familiar with, well, I know of them. I haven't ever played it. So you can use it as for Antares, maybe with Algorand stats. Oh, that sounds kind of cool. Key to good edge highlighting paint flow is to keep your paint thin and always be wicking. That's true. I'm pretty sure that Puppets War makes pumpkin heads, if that's the head you really like. Yeah, I think I've seen somebody. I think you're right, probably. Puppets War, it would make sense that they would be them. Let's see. I feel like the most painting woes are caused because there's too much liquid in the brush. Wipe some of it off. Yeah, I could see that too. Horizon Wars is really good small-scale rule set that's miniature agnostic. I don't remember if I own that or not. It sounds really familiar, but I can't remember if I own it or not. Where could I possibly get, or what would you suggest for winter/snowed-in scenery for Warhammer? I mean, honestly, generally what would happen is that you would take normal terrain, and then you would, when you're painting it, you would make it look like it was wintered, like it got snow on it and stuff like that. I see a lot of people do that for Frostgrave. They'll take like fantasy style, especially like ruined fantasy buildings, and then paint them to look as if they've got snow on them and stuff like that. I have not. Have I done that? I've done snow bases like once or twice, but I've never done snow terrain that I can think of. So you might want to look for some tutorials online for that. But that's generally the way to do it. I mean, I don't know. Like, if you're actually trying to make something look like it's got snowbanks and things like blown up against it, like drifted up against it, that would be hard, and I'm not quite sure how you would do it. Just because snow can be so smooth, especially when it's become drifted, it becomes very smooth and sweeping to some degree. That's a good question. I found that black Taclon synthetics are stiffer, better for edge highlighting. I've only ever heard of gold Taclon. I've never heard of black Taclon. That sounds fun. Any tips for practicing when I can't stand the mistakes and results I get? Having real difficulty fighting the gray when I dislike my own work. Well, you have to get better. So that's why you have to practice. Don't ever look at practice as like, oh, this is terrible. Just look at, okay, well, let's not do that again. Or let's try to do better than the last one. Like, that's what practice does. Like, if I was to decide to pick up the cello, potentially, or the piano or something like that, my first songs that I would play would not be good. And if you just go, well, this is terrible, then you don't ever learn anything. You have to start and then build upon it and go from there. And that's how you get better. It just takes time. Patience is the key, but also working. Like, make it keep happening. That's the big deal. Bob says that Horizon Wars is great. It's BattleTech with rules that make sense. Whoa, that's weird. Anyone know where I can buy a bunch of purity seals for my Marines? Probably eBay if you need like a whole lot, because GW doesn't sell that kind of stuff directly anymore. They did used to sell bits, they don't anymore. So I'd take a look on eBay. I believe Liquitex makes a gel medium to make fake snow. I know that Sam's favorite fake snow is actually this crushed glass stuff that you can get from Secret Weapon Miniatures. But you can also use, sometimes you use baking soda, honestly. But yeah. If you make a mistake with edge highlighting too thick or got it on the place you do not want, just go in with your base shadow highlight color and make the line skinnier by painting the edge away. I can see that. Yeah, it makes sense. Blackmagic crafted game tiles for Frostgrave a while ago. Might have been some snow advice in there. That makes sense. Esther says, for snowy terrain, mix baking soda, PVA glue, and white paint and add it to where you want. I think that sounds... I know that there's also... GW makes a paint that's designed to be snow. Something Tundra, I think. And I think that Sam used that stuff. If you go back on my channel, Sam did some tutorials a couple years ago or a year ago about Song of Ice and Fire models, the Game of Thrones type game from Cool Mini. Because he and his girlfriend are into that, and I think he had snow bases there, but he was using, I believe, that stuff. And I think his Stormcast for Age of Sigmar are on snow bases as well. Let's see here. I used your info that metallics pop better over a black base. Painting Grey Knights looks way better than over the white base. Oh, yeah. No, metallics always look better over black than white. Also, just because if there's any spots that you miss with black, then they just become a shadow because they're probably down in a weird spot, you know what I mean? Like a crevice in between two plates of armor and stuff like that. But if there's white in between two plates of armor and you miss that with the next layer of paint, it looks weird and it doesn't look like a shadow. So, yeah. Goblin Fart. That's a good name. Hey, man. New to the hobby, new to the channel. Just popped in to say you've been a terrific help. Keep up the good stuff. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Kit Lindquist says, I've taken a chance and kit bashed the large Age of Sigmar Corvus Cabal box for Necromunda. Oh, for Warcry, the Corvus Cabal. Oh, yeah. And you've done them for Necromunda. Interesting. They're all done apart from the mini with open wings, which I'm kind of stuck on at the moment. Those are real spindly models. Yeah, I've built some of them and then I goofed up their bases and used the wrong ones. So I need to go back and fix that. GW Valhalla Blizzard? Yeah, that might be right, I guess. I thought the word Tundra was in there, but Valhalla Blizzard might be the right one. Valhalla Blizzard? Yeah, I think I own some. Because after that video, I was like, I want to do some... Well, I think I'm going to use it, to be fair, with my Yeti. Yes, I do own some. I know exactly where it is, now that I kind of think of it. Use real snow. That may not work, Moderator Matt. That will... it'll work for a little bit, and then it will stop working. And then your model will be all wet. What do people do when the store in their area gets closed permanently and no one plays at home locally? Just paint. Yeah, or try to get your friends involved to some degree. One thing that I've found is that, and this is hard to do, obviously, with war games, like big army games, like 40K, Age of Sigmar, games where there's maybe 100 models per side. This is not something you can usually do. But with smaller skirmish games where you have maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 models per side, you can build and paint 2 forces and then have your friend come over or whatever and be like, hey, let's play. You can use these guys, or you pick whichever one they want to use, and then you use the other one, and then you teach them how to play, and you can kind of go that way. Again, if you needed to have 2,000-point armies so that you and your friend could play, that's a bigger problem, because it's a lot more money, it's a lot more time, it's a lot more storage. I mean, there's a lot of things. But when you're talking about skirmish games, it's very easy to make 2 forces for a skirmish game so that you and a friend, or you and whoever you want to try to teach the game can learn and can play. But yeah, it is that is the tough thing. I picked up 40K right before the pandemic started, and now I have a lot of painted models, but have never played. When things look safer, how can I find others to play with outside of the local store? In the past, I would have told you to use an app that I helped design. It's part of my day job, but we have currently hibernated that app because people aren't supposed to be playing, and traffic just dropped because obviously people aren't playing and finding each other locally to play with, so they don't get each other diseased. But yeah, so that's a tough one then. The stores are not a bad place to start. If you don't have a store, yeah, it's a little bit harder. Sometimes Reddit, it's tough. It's very tough. That's why we made the app, and now we'll see what happens once people get to go back outside again. Woodland Scenic Snowflock is great. Soilworks Soiled Snow gives a good snow melt look. That's kind of interesting. I haven't heard of that. Hey, Adam. Just want to let you know I've been recommending a number of your videos to friends who are new to the hobby, and they're making leaps and bounds thanks to your content. You rock. Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much. Yeah, I'm glad they help. That's mainly the thing. Robert White, Death Guard or Necrons? Depends on what you want. They're both fun to paint. Necrons are generally quicker to paint. Death Guard are fun to paint, but they take longer because there's a lot of pustules, carbuncles, fistulas, all kinds of weird little diseasey bits all over. And so, those are fun to paint, but they take longer. Let's see. For snow on my Frostgrave minis, I used spackle for the volume and texturing, wash with a light blue, and dry brush white, seal with matte or gloss varnish, depending on the desired effect. That's pretty cool. I just realized it's a little after 11, so I apologize for that. But nonetheless, yeah, so take some chances and, paint some things, maybe do some models in a way you hadn't thought of before, look up some new techniques, put some snow bases on some things, maybe try that out, see what it goes on. But again, I want to thank folks for coming by and finding, hopefully some answers, or at least having some fun, maybe get some hobby done while you're working on things and you got something to listen to, so that's always a lot of fun. But yeah, again, like I said, for more live streaming, Twitch, Monday evenings at 7 p.m. Central and Friday mornings at 10 a.m. Central. Lately, I've been painting my Skaven warband for Warcry. They'll be done soon, and they'll be moving on to something else. But otherwise, hopefully you're keeping safe, and we'll see you again here on the Every Other Sunday show in about a fortnight, or 2 weeks, as the people on my side of the pond call it. But thanks for watching.